Tonight I am going to continue with the 11th chapter of the book Interconnected. The title of the chapter is Lenses for a Global Society. And the book, again, is Interconnected by Yawang Karmapa. Where I'm beginning is where I ended last week, and it is a section titled Working with Aversion. This and the next sections till the end of this chapter are going to be talking about how we become more inclusive and how we increase equanimity. The goal is being able to experience the same affection towards all sentient beings equally, and to again have this same open heart, this gentle, tender heart for all sentient beings. So we have to work with aversion and attachment. This first one is about working with aversion. I'm going to start here with a quote. When we label the entire person as bad, then we are also maligning and denying whatever positive qualities they have, including their latent goodness. Another word for this would be their Buddha nature. What's important is that we separate the behavior from the person. It's the behavior or the attitude that is causing the problem, causing them to act in a way that you have an aversion for. Since we're talking about a human being here, they have the same potential as we have. And quite reasonably, we can assume that they behaved better in some other situations that maybe you weren't present to experience. So if we just label them as being bad and don't want to have anything to do with them, Karmapa says that it's disrespectful to reality when you paint a person bad just because of a certain type of behavior. And if you look at it, the enemies can become friends. We fought the Germans and the Japanese in the Second World War, and they have become our best friends. And even Vietnam is becoming closer to Vietnam now that this country is looking at China as being the real threat in Asia. So it's important to realize that the behavior of difficult people can be driven by insecurity, by fear, and misguided strategies to gain happiness. He feels that this may mean that they need more comfort, more care, more support. And they could also be reacting to your negative attitude. I think we all can remember times when we have had a negative attitude towards a certain person or a certain group of people. I am going to point out the situation of homeless people. Sometimes homeless people can act and behave in ways that are difficult to accept. But a lot of times it's a measure of their desperation and their suffering and their actual hunger and their desire for happiness. And another thing to remember is that different People can be in similar situations, situations that we have been in, yet suffer more than we do. What comes to my mind specifically is when I'm going through security at the airport, where you have these long lines and it's kind of tense. You have the TSA officers that are there and they're putting your belongings to go through the metal detector, and you're having to take off anything that you're wearing that has metal in it in your shoes and yada, yada, yada. And it's going longer than you would like it to be going. And maybe somebody is wondering if they're going to get to their gate before the gate closes and the plane takes off without them. But we're basically all in the same situation. And some people, you might say, have an emotional meltdown. And this is what Karmapa was talking about, is that you can be in a similar situation with another person, and if we can maintain the stability of our mind that we've gained through practice and so forth, we will suffer less than other people. And those that are suffering more than us, it can mean that they are yearning for happiness more than we are. When I was preparing this talk this morning, what came to mind was an experience I had yesterday. I posted this on my Facebook page. I don't know if either of you have seen this, but I went to Fleet Farm, which is a combination hardware store and farm supply store, and maybe general store. You can get cleaning supplies there, hardware, wiring, plumbing, heating, paint, screws, nails, nuts and bolts. They have an automotive section, a tractor section, a yard and garden section, an animal section, pet section, and on and on and on. I was looking for a particular item and I asked an employee where it would be, and he led me right to it. And then he surprised me and he said, "I'm your new neighbor." So I asked him, where did he live? And well, he bought a house and outbuildings and about 80 acres of land, no more than 2 miles from me. And I knew the people that lived there before, but I hadn't seen them for years. And it was a distant, very, very distant relationship that we had. Well, he said that one of them got cancer and died, and then the other one got a different type of cancer and he died, and then the property came up for sale and he bought it. And we talked a little more, and then he said, "It's been a tough year that my son was killed a little less than a year ago." So this is what happened to his son. His son had gone to the same high school that my son had gone to, which was in Prairie Farm. I believe there were 26 students in my son's graduating class. It's a small, small rural school. And his son, after graduating from high school there, he wanted to be a police officer. I think he had been in the military too. He became a police officer, and at the age of 23, he made a traffic stop about 20 miles from here with his partner, and the man that they stopped got out of the car with an AR-15 rifle and opened fire and killed both of them. So that's how his son had died. The point being is we don't really know what kind of suffering people that we come across experiencing, what their state of mind is and why they feel that way. So this man still dealing with the shock and the grief of having a 23-year-old son shot and killed. To go on then, with mindfulness, we can be aware of aversion as it arises in our minds. When it arises, we can drop it, or at least do our best to drop it, and try to connect with a person's positive qualities. I did not feel aversion for this man. In fact, I talked quite a long time with him. I asked him questions about himself and about the farm and so forth. And of course, expressed my sorrow about his son. And I put the son's name on my personal shrine where I put cards for people that have died or are suffering. So anyway, it's important to connect with a person that we have aversion for, to connect with their inner conditions as well as their outer conditions. If a person's inner conditions change, then the world that they live in changes too, because we project so much onto the world that we inhabit. Now, there are a lot of different techniques for working with aversion. He does not go into them in this book and in this chapter. He does say basically whatever techniques work for you, use them. He also makes a point of feeling that it's very important to respect and have affection for everyone. Even the people that are difficult, the destitute, the down and out, the mentally ill, the beggars, the people that have different political views from you, and so forth. He ends it with this quote, "At the very least, we can connect to them with confidence in their inner potential." The next section is working with attachment. I will begin this section with a quote, "With attachment driven by personal desire and self-interest, we trap ourselves." He uses the analogy of a silkworm that traps itself in its own web. And what came to my mind was a teaching of Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche that he used extensively, which was the cocoon metaphor. He talked about us living in a cocoon. And of course, a cocoon is made by the caterpillar that is inside it, that it covers itself with its own, very similar to silk, and it lives inside that cocoon and feels very secure in there. So this is how we can trap ourselves with our own desires, focusing on self-interest and so forth. We kind of block out the whole rest of the world. So it's important to know the defects of attachment, how it excludes many, many people to being concerned about, and we get overly concerned about others. With attachment, we really aren't interested in learning about other people. We want them to learn about us. And we want them to tell us what we want to hear. And if we don't get what we want to hear, then we become irritated. We can become resentful, and we can even get angry. So attachment is about me. It's about what I can get from the other person or from an outer object. To contrast this with love, love is about the other person. Again, attachment is self-centered. Love is other-oriented. And continue with this quote, attachment is about fulfillment of my self-interests. Love cares about the other's need. So the first step in working with attachment is to become aware of its presence in our mind stream, and then replace it with love. Replace it with caring about the other person. The next chapter continues with this, and this is titled Unconditional Love. So our altruism needs to be sustained. We need to develop patience, uses the term mental agility, to carry this into a greater number of beings in different situations. It requires training. It is not something that is natural for most people. This is actually bodhisattva training, to train so that you can give more and more. A bodhisattva can give 100%. And we, as being Mahayana practitioners or Vajrayana practitioners, we aspire to be able to do this too. So he uses Milarepa as an example here. Milarepa was motivated to benefit others all the time as he progressed. And he endured great hardships for the benefit of others. He would dedicate the merit to others. He would begin the day with aspirations to benefit others. He would begin a practice with the aspiration to benefit others. And of course, nobody knew what he was doing. It was all done in wilderness and caves and so forth. And to look at the outer appearance of Milarepa, which was he lived under great austerity, they might think that he was somewhat, shall we say, mentally deranged. Yet, even though nobody knew what he was doing, nobody cared about him, or at least appeared to care about him, he would break into songs of joy spontaneously. He was quite happy doing what he was doing and undergoing the austerities. Quote, the key thing is to enjoy the goodness of what you are doing and feeling. Enjoy the sensation of filling your own heart with love and then offering it to others. So that's a very, very important point. It might seem selfish to work on filling your heart with love, but what you're doing is you're preparing yourself to give it to other people, to share it, and to have this unconditional love for others. So the process is, first you begin to open your heart to yourself. You develop a warm place in your heart for yourself. You urge yourself on, and you give yourself approval and encouragement. And this might seem like it's self-indulgence, but we need to have this self-interest as we're not bodhisattvas yet. We're bodhisattvas in training. And little by little, this attachment to our self-interest weakens. We nourish that warm place. We acknowledge it. We delight in it. And then, of course, we share it. The sharing is extending this warm heart to others. And very simply, if you don't have a warm heart for yourself, how can you share a warm heart with other people? It's going to be a lot of times, perhaps, look like you're giving them unconditional love, but what you're really doing is looking for their approval. It's really this attachment. Then the last section in this book is titled Choosing Our Direction. Now, here he goes to a bigger view. The models of our global relationship will help give us options on how to decide which direction to go in. That we have choices, we have resources, and as I mentioned, we have options. So it's good to ask ourselves, what sort of life gives the most satisfaction to me and is the most meaningful? He feels that's a very important question to ask ourselves and investigate. As we go through life, our goal is to live with interdependence, realizing how we are interdependent with other human beings, with other animals, and with the earth and all types of other forms of life on earth. So we want to also consider how can our lifestyle be sustainable and the way we live be sustainable for all beings to live like this. And also to cultivate our inner resources so that we know what contributions we can make with the world, what we can share with the world. I want to add this. A big part of Buddhist practice is introspection, getting to know yourself better, getting to know your qualities, getting to know your habitual patterns, your expectations, your faults, and so forth. And it might seem like you're spending too much time on your negativity and treating yourself like you are a horrible person by acknowledging your faults. But we acknowledge our faults in a way, hopefully, that is actually beneficial, that allows us to weaken the faults and strengthen our qualities. What frequently happens is people want to deny their faults, forget about them, and think that their good qualities are very much bigger than they really are. But if we don't acknowledge what our faults are, we have nothing to work with. And when we meditate and do other practices, it opens up our mind and we see things more clearly. So when you do start seeing faults, it doesn't mean you are becoming worse necessarily. It means you're becoming more aware. And of course, the solution is to work with the faults and the negativity that you see in your being. The last chapter of this book, chapter 12, is linking aspirations. He talks about there is ordinary happiness and there is true happiness. Ordinary happiness is short, lived, it's fleeting, and it's superficial. And a lot of times we chase after that, and other beings chase after this fleeting, superficial happiness. True happiness is a complete freedom from any reason to suffer. It is freedom from suffering. That no matter what is going on externally, you are not suffering. So he begins this chapter with this quote: to go beyond ordinary happiness and suffering, beyond the limitations of our immediate experience, even beyond birth and death. The causes of happiness must be joined with wisdom. And I'll repeat that, joined with wisdom. So discernment, which comes from wisdom, is one of our most precious resources. And we can use that to distinguish between what is superficial and what is deeper than that, what is really important. I have here discernment. Definition of discernment is the quality of being able to grasp and comprehend what is obscure. It is the ability to judge well. Discernment cuts through the misconception that lasting happiness can be obtained through the material world and material development. If we just have enough scientists, enough business people, little by little, the world will become better as we have a higher material level of development. The more machines we have, the more goods that can be produced, the more scientific studies we have, and so forth, that there will be more happiness. One of my favorite ways of dispelling this kind of thinking is my grandmother, who was born in 1896, I believe. And she grew up on a farm in Wisconsin, in rural Wisconsin. And of course, even when she was 10, 12, 14, they had horses. They didn't have machinery that were gas powered. It was hard work living on the farm. The house, I'm sure, was very cold in the middle of the winter time, that it was heated with wood, was not insulated, it was drafty. I never heard her talk about being cold. She would talk very kindly and lovingly about her experiences as a child. And she was the youngest child, and she had, I think, at least 6 older brothers. And sometimes there would be some fights. And she would talk about how sometimes she would be the one that was chasing them around with a stick of wood. And if she caught them, she'd beat them. I think she would have been called a tomboy, living on the farm, having to do the farm work a lot of times, and having to get along with brothers that were older than her. And I remember I have a younger sister. I was sometimes kind of hard on my sister. And yet my grandmother spoke lovingly of those days growing up without television, radio, a car, without a thermostat, without the kind of central heating that we are used to. And Now it's like you lose power for a day because of a storm for 6 hours, and it's a problem. It's a big problem. You can't use your cell phone. You can't use the internet. You can't watch TV. You can't make a phone call. Oh my gosh, this is terrible. Anyway, the point being is, quote, no physical techniques in the world, no matter how clever or effective, can generate an inner sense of well-being. To do this, we need to develop our inner resources. And of course, the main problem with outer resources is because of impermanence. I don't care how nice a car you have, how expensive it is, at some point you're going to have to put gas in it or hook it up to the grid and recharge the batteries. At some point, you're going to need to put new tires on it. Whatever outer objects that we have, physical objects that we have, they're temporary. And our material development is limited by nature and limited by the environment. If we are going to look long-term at nature and the environment, we have to live in harmony with it. We have to have a sustainable lifestyle, a sustainable economy, and so forth. And if we continue to look for happiness in the material world, then there is competition for scarce resources. Then we start thinking that happiness is a limited resource if we're basing it on resources. Karmapa uses the term zero-sum game, that what this means is it's the viewpoint that there is a finite amount of happiness, and are we going to share it equally, or do some people get more happiness than other people? That's what a zero-sum game is, that there is only so much of what the prize is when you win, and there is no more to go around. There's just this limited amount. But actually, happiness comes from within, and there's no limit to it. When we look at outer resources, outer objects, and so forth, there's competition, and there are differences in how the resource is distributed. And some people feel like they're getting the short end of the stick, so to speak. Empathy shuts down. Karmapa says that we become blind to the beauty and strength of diversity. We don't see our own beauty reflected in others because of this, and we really don't even see others at all. Walking by a beggar and not acknowledging their presence. You know they are there, but you don't really acknowledge that they are there. It's like you wish you didn't have to walk by them because it's making you feel awkward. So Karmapa says that we need to develop new ways of relating to others, new ways of relating to the world. He says that one of his aspirations for writing this book is for a fundamental shift in perspective, and that this will come about when, quote, we live our lives with an emotional awareness of our interdependence. The next section is planting aspirations. So we have a natural capacity to empathize and care for others, to care compassionately for others. So we have this basis to build on aspirations to benefit others. We're not creating something that wasn't there all along. We are just using what has been there all along as a starting point. So aspirations orient us in life. It's good to hold them in our heart, and they will guide our intentions and our actions. And yet our aspirations can be larger than either. I talked about aspirations in a talk a few weeks ago. And in Buddhism, we make vast aspirations, aspirations that would be impossible for a person to actually bring into fruition unless they are a bodhisattva. And even then, it might be difficult. But our intention and our aspirations determine the direction that we are going in with our actions of body, speech, and mind. We may not get to the complete end of what our aspirations are, but we're at least trying to go in that direction. And the aspirations keep our body, speech, and our mind working together. They keep us from, you might say, being scattered, going off in a number of different directions and doing different things, but having them not producing movement in the same direction. So our aspirations will help us to decide what specific intention is needed to produce the desired result. These aspirations, they're like planting seeds. And then we have to protect the sprout. This is a bit like gardening. There's an analogy that he uses. We protect the sprout. We nurture and care for the plant while it is growing. And then you need to make sure that they are firmly rooted. And in this case, these aspirations, we have to make sure they're firmly rooted in our heart. And then they will bear fruit. And then we will harvest the fruit. This reminded me of a very short example that I have used in the past, and I've called it the garden of your mind. Here I could say the garden of your heart. But when you're actually gardening, first you have to prepare the soil, then you plant the seeds, and then when the seeds sprout, you have to be able to identify the sprouts and separate them from the weeds that are sprouting and pull up the weeds at the roots so that the weeds do not steal moisture from the plants that you want to grow. And you don't want the weeds to grow, and they frequently will grow much faster than the plants that you want to grow, and will cause the plants that you want to grow to be shaded, and they don't grow as well. You want to make sure you don't throw trash on your garden, or that you just walk over it and stomp the plants down. We have to be careful of all kinds of behavior to avoid damaging or perhaps permanently destroying these seeds that we are trying to grow in our heart. He says this, Aspirations grow gradually, so tending them requires patience and perseverance. Meaning that we have to be patient and we have to continually remind ourselves to persevere, even if if the going gets a little difficult. And we need to be aware of this interconnectedness that we have with all other beings on the planet. He says, why not have each interconnection with another being be a beneficial one? Now, the next section is titled Not Losing Heart. This is where courage comes in, that we need to avoid losing heart, abandoning our aspirations. And it is our own egocentrism that causes this. Quote, it happens when we are looking at things purely from our own perspective. So it has a very simple solution, and that is look at situations from the perspective of others. He says, if you're seeing the loneliness and suffering in another person, how can you give up? If you can see that, this will give you inspiration to keep going, to persevere. Because of interdependence, we can look at situations and other people from a wide range of different angles, from different vantage points. And the different vantage points can be all valid and they can be mutually enriching. And he says that wisdom lets us know when to look from a different viewpoint. So this is a very important thing to remember. What comes to my mind is if you go to a museum and you see a sculpture, sometimes the sculptures are in such a place in the center of the room where you can walk behind them. And so look at the sculpture from the front, from the side, from the back, from the other side. Look at different aspects of the sculpture. There are just so many viewpoints that you can be standing in and places that you can focus on. You could be there all day long if you really got into great detail about this. So in terms of other beings, you can look at it from the viewpoint of the person being, say, female, or the person being a mother, or the person being in a certain age group or a certain category, cultural category, and on and on and on and on. There are just so many different ways you can look at a person. We all have many different, you might say, worlds that we live in. We can see that others also live in many different worlds. And the viewpoint that you are looking at can give you very different feedback about the person. So we are all global citizens. We have a global family. We have global friends. We also have neighbors. There are motorists that are on the road with us when we're driving. When we're shopping, we're a shopper with other shoppers. We are citizens of a country. If you're in the United States, you're citizens of a state, and maybe if you live in a city, you're a citizen of a particular city or urban area, county, and so forth. And also, of course, another group that we're in are relatives. our aunts and uncles, our nieces and nephews, our children, grandchildren, and on and on and on. That we can look at things from the perspective of those who need us to act to help them, who need us to develop courage so that we can help them. There's just so many different points of view. When our motivation goes down, when we feel, you might say, our figurative feet dragging, and we kind of want to quit, we can use our wisdom, we can become flexible mentally, and we can try to see things from the side of the other, the person or persons that we're trying to help. And this can increase our commitment to help. This can help develop our courage. Karmapa says, other times courage comes from looking within. Look at your personal aspirations, or look at the aspirations that others have. So look at these aspirations. Quote, this is how to apply wisdom to increase your mental agility and actively nurture your own tender aspirations.